Well, today in this session, we're going to look at parent-teacher conferences and try to identify the steps in conducting an effective two-way conference, and also look at some techniques that teachers could use that we found in the past that tend to work in handling different types of difficult parents. So let's get on with it. You know, if you look at the importance of effective teaching parent conferences, they're essential in the continuing success of each child. But they can be stressful, and the teacher as well as the parents can approach them with some level of stress. A lot of times teachers find that laying the groundwork for a productive relationship builds a partnership that remains throughout the year, and typically it's in the best interest of the child. And research study after study continues to indicate that perhaps the most significant factor in a child's success in school is the involvement of the parents. So in fact, Phi Delta Kappa found that one of the top 10 indicators of a child at risk was the number of times that a parent entered the schoolhouse door. So more times we can communicate with parents, and chances are the higher the success rate will be for that child. So what are some characteristics of effective conferences? They take planning. They take hopefully a collaborative tone as they develop, and a lot of times there's a pattern to them. So we're going to look at that as we look at parent-teacher conferences. Typically, you want it to first set a positive stage, a professional stage, and on that night or that day of the conference, you want to dress professionally, so you look the part. Shakespeare says, "Apparel oft proclaims a man," and so too is it with teachers. They are professionals, and they ought to be seen as that. So dress professionally, and then get your classroom ready so that if you have your parent-teacher conference in the classroom, it's barrier-free, that there are places for the parents to sit, and that doesn't elevate one over the other. So there's equity in the elevation and sites of communication. I would not have a desk in between you and the parent, because it tends to put a barrier between you. So sit to the side of your desk or go to another place in the room without a barrier in front of you. Typically, you have at your disposal, or quick disposal, the books that you use, some examples of the works that kids have done, and perhaps hopefully a paper or two of each of the children there that you could readily pull up and use as an illustration. You want to have your grades calculated at that point in time, especially outlining or having ready the missing assignments. And I would always put someplace for every child, even the Kent Runyons of the world, some good work that they've done, so that you can brag about the success of that child in your classroom to the parent. And then if you've got a child that really does have some misbehaviors that you need to get corrected, I would consult the disciplinehelp.com website, sponsored by the master teacher, and they have 117 behaviors of typical children in classroom, and it talks about and will give you information on typically what needs are not being met, how it affects you and your classroom and him or her, and then it will list some very interesting strategies that you possibly could use to meet those needs, to help that child. And so it will give you some ideas that you could take into that conference if there are some behaviors you need to correct. You know, as you look at conducting the conference, it's typically nice to meet them at the door or the entranceway with a positive icebreaker. You know, typically in icebreakers we look at the weather, or we look at some aspect of the child, but something of common that you could almost talk about at the drop of a hat. And then look them in the eye, shake their hand, and welcome them to your classroom. Because for many parents, coming into a classroom is that, especially if they haven't graduated from high school, can be a stressful event. So welcome them and sit them down with you and let them cover their agenda first if they seem to want to talk first. Listen to what they have to say, and the listening part is the key, because you want to listen not exactly what they say, but what's implied in what they say. Not that they're beating around the bush, but sometimes what they say, they mean something else. We look at both what they say and what the implied message is. If it's appropriate, with the amount of time that you have, you want to provide an overview of your class that's kind of free of educational jargon, and you'd be surprised things that parents don't understand, such as mastery learning or cooperative learning or the multiple intelligences. Those sorts of things you might explain. But if it's the first time you've met in the school year, talk about your course and how it's structured and what you're trying to do with these children for that year. Talk about and the parents always want to know about the kids' class. What are the characteristics, how they interact, and then what assignments and evaluations that you're doing during the year. Especially the state tests that may be coming up, but the big assignments and the big evaluations are always interested. Parents are interested in hearing about. If it's also appropriate, you want to talk about that specifically about the child. And almost always the first question I want to know about my children was their social behavior. How are they getting along with others? And I think that's a tendency of most parents. And then I'll ask about how they're doing in class, the academic performance. And then it's always nice to hear about the successes, even if my child talks all the time. And you phrase it such as, he's a very social individual. Unless it's become a problem, and then we start talking about maybe getting them less social. But you talk about the strengths and weaknesses of a child in a professional manner. Using professional words, and positive words as much as possible, to give that parent a pretty good perspective of what that child is doing in your classroom. If it's appropriate, then if you have a target or a correction of the behavior or a suggestion to improve the academic performance of the child, then with the parent develop a plan of action. That might include some steps that you're each going to take with time limits, and it's always kind of important to put those time limits, because if you don't, then it tends to kind of just get washed away. And also, who's going to be responsible for what? Will the parent check the homework at home? Do I need to send a note home each blank? But what are the responsibilities? What can specifically the parent do at home to help the child to check on the correction of the behavior? And then always set a time for the next correspondence, whether it be a meeting or an email or a telephone call or a note home. But set specific benchmarks that you want to reach to get that behavior or academic performance increased. And then I think it's almost imperative. The last thing a parent wants to hear when they leave is a positive thing. So then end on a positive note. Summarize the conference, what you're each going to do, so they hear it one more time, and then on a positive note, we're going to together work on getting Bobby to where he's going to be academic successful. So kind of a simple process to follow. Oftentimes, if you're in a secondary school, when you might have 140 students, it's kind of good to maybe keep a parent conference form. Also, if you may be into an IEP situation or 504, or a situation where you think may balloon into something more negative than just talking it over, you might have a parent conference form where you take notes, see what recommendations, results came out of it, when and where, who said what, and the like. And keep that in your own notes. It doesn't have to be in this form, as you see here, but I think it is important to denote sometime or another when you talked and what the results were. So often, I love this little cartoon. I had to put it in there because so often I've seen over my years of experience that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and you can see why he is a lot of times with the parents when when they come during parent-teacher conference. The majority of parents respect the teaching profession and will respect you and want the best for their child. When they see that you're willing to work with them for the betterment of their children, things go well. But at times, sometimes parents get upset because many will live vicariously through their children. They as we see in sports, a lot of times dribble the ball with them almost every time they go down the basketball court. But it is oftentimes when something goes wrong, when the child doesn't succeed, the parent does get upset. So how do you handle hostile parents? Coaches see this oftentimes. They don't play the child, or they bench the child, or a myriad of reasons. And teachers will see it when kids come home with stretching the situation that happened in the classroom. And so oftentimes it's not perfect like you saw in the last parent-teacher conference. So let's look at how you might, some steps in facing a hostile parent or a critical parent. We're going to look at specific types of hard-to-handle parent situations in a minute, but typically your best advice for any hostile situation is to listen, as you listen, to define the specific criticism of the problem and the level of emotion being expressed as they start to talk with you. You want to focus on responding to the problem or the criticism, but first you need to define it, and part of that is to define specifically what the problem is. A lot of times it is a hidden agenda. It is not the very first thing that they complain about. So this may take some time, but you want to bring it around to focus on to the criticism or to the problem, and not get upset that it's your fault. The blame will be placed, I'm sure. But you want to refocus that discussion onto a partnership, to what you and I, as teacher and parent, can do to get this problem corrected, so we can get something accomplished. So, more specifically, as you listen, even under criticism, you do it through what we call attending skills. That is, you lean forward. There's solid eye contact. There's some parallel nonverbal gestures that you follow, the shaking of the head or the sour face, as you listen, so that they understand that you understand what exactly they're saying. And as you listen, you assess that level of feeling and emotion, because you have in your classroom their most prized possession. And so when they feel wronged, when they feel that their child is suffering, so they want to get that corrected. And so they sometimes will lash out or to blame the one that has immediate care of the child. So listen for the hidden agendas, for what they don't say, because many times that's the important thing to nail. If there are any inappropriate references to other people, at first you don't respond to them, you ignore them, and if it continues to develop, you need to cease the conference if they become too emotional or too abusive, or any time that a cuss word's used. I think that's a good time to break if it gets to that point. But you know when it gets to be a little bit too hostile, and you're moved to meet at a later date, or if they don't want to do that, you call in the principal or a peer or a colleague to help calm things down. And but at any time that you feel threatened, that's a time to bring it to a quick end and get the administration in there. That's not going to happen, but once or twice maybe in your career. Very seldom does that occur. The second step, once you've kind of defined or listened to the parent, you want to kind of nail the specific criticism or the problem. Sometimes it's very undefined, it's very unclear. Maybe sometimes they don't even know exactly what it is. They just know they're mad. But a lot of times, I love the phrase, Carl Rogers trains us to do this in Rogerian counseling. Now, what I hear you saying is, and reflect it back to them. You're upset because blank, blank, blank. And let them tell you, no, that's not really it. Now, yeah, I think that's exactly what I feel. And so you get to define and let them hear exactly what they're upset about. Because a lot of times, sometimes when they hear it, they say, well, that is kind of ridiculous. And then once you define the problem, respond to it. And again, you need to kind of consider the cultural or intellectual background of the parent, because that can make a difference in the response. Also evaluate the emotional climate. At times when you're up in upper levels of anger, no amount of persuasion on your part will make a lick of difference, and that's your best time to do it when cooler heads prevail. But you keep in mind all the reasons that parent may have to be upset, and sometimes they have, many times, nothing to do with you. That they've lost control of their child, especially in the secondary area, and that is, you're the horse that they're going to beat while you're in front of them. I would avoid comparing the child to any siblings you might have or other situations in your classroom. I would avoid getting into side issues or exceptions, because you want to center right on the specific defined behavior of that child and focus your comments and possible responses to what you have control over in your classroom. And then most of the time it's appropriate to ask, once you've got the problem defined and you responded to the criticism, for appropriate suggestions from them. What do you see as a good answer for this situation? Because you want to respond to that criticism, and a lot of times as positively as you can, offer your point of view, clarify your position, and the more you can detail it with very specific observations or experiences or records. I've found it so often, time and time again, what the kid goes home and says is half the truth. It's not exactly what happened. There's an element of truth in it, but it does not denote the context of the situation and the like. So a lot of times with that, the parents say, well, you didn't tell me that. But as much as you can, be short and concise, and again, don't use psychology terms or professional jargon to confuse them. And once you've got that criticism or problem defined, you move towards common ground. What can you and I do? We're a team, and I want the best for your child. Now, what can we do to help him succeed and get over this issue? And the more you can develop that positive interdependence between you and the parent, that we're in this together, the higher the probability you can get something done. But a lot of times parents see their child in different classes as you do. And I've raised 3 kids, and I know my daughter could never do any wrong. My 2 boys could, but we each see our kids as different individuals. When you actually have a hostile parent in front of you, there are really only 4 outcomes that can be accomplished in meeting in a parent-teacher conference with them. That optimally you can convert them to your point of view, or more common, you compromise. And then if you can't reach a compromise, you can at least understand and leave respecting each other's point of view, or you don't reach an understanding and there's continued hostility and criticism. And as much as possible, that's where you don't want to go, because then a lot of times they'll seek revenge and try to jump over your head to go to the principal or to the superintendent or board member that they know. And it does nobody any good when that occurs. Gotta love this cartoon too. At any rate, let's look at some different types of parents that may come to your class. I love doing this in regular face-to-face classes because we role play some of these, and I love to play the pit bull and the know-it-all, and then use specific techniques to see if you could handle that parent. Again, you very seldom will see all of these in your entire career, but at least with the knowledge in your back pocket to handle these, I think it makes you much more confident as you interact with parents. Again, a vast majority, 95% of those parents would be in your corner and want the best for their child and the like, and very seldom will you see any of these that we're going to talk about. Probably the hardest one is to handle is the pit bull. And he's the type of individual that attacks. He's the type that has a short attention span, and he wants action now. And what you don't want to do with a pit bull is agree with him or challenge him or even get mad, because that just flames the pit bull and he attacks more vigorously. But what you do, if he continues to attack, you look at him right in the eye and let him vent for a little while, and then you interrupt the attack if we're continuing to rehash some things, and use the parent's name, because that oftentimes is calming, with a low tone of voice, and go again with Rogerian words like, now let me see if I understand you right. You're awful upset because, and see if you can define exactly what the problem is. And then if you can't define that, ask him some questions. Make a statement such as, well, so help me understand this problem. Do you mind if I ask you some questions? And then see if you can get exactly what he's upset and what action he exactly wants, and then move to that solution phase. You know what the issue is, and make a statement of conviction that I want to get this together. I want to get this solved with you, and make it personal. Yeah, I see your side, and let's work together. And then go over what you think would be a good plan with the pit bull. Sometimes hard to handle, and they calm down a lot of times when you start to get them to define the problem and ask them to work in your corner. Well, the know-it-all, a lot of times these are, they could be teachers themselves, but they have all the answers before they ask the question, and their attitude a lot of times is, you're not very good, you're kind of incompetent, and that they are a little bit better than everybody else. And what you don't want to do with them is tell them what the solution is, because they already have one. And I wouldn't challenge their authority, their amount of knowledge. That gets us nowhere. But with this individual, we typically go slow. You kind of want to reflect back on their point of view. You want to listen exactly the positive and negative points that they're making, and ask questions, so you know exactly what their agenda is. That questions help validate them, that show that you respect their knowledge or their authority that they're trying to denote. And make sure you document exactly what their direction is, what they want to do. But then again, with them, as you do with the pet bull, you continue to use the plural, we, us, and let them, as much as you can, agree with what they say. And then if things aren't going directly, what do you think if we tried this? Now, because they know it all, so you propose in your solution with the idea, what do you think if we tried this, so that they would, again, use their knowledge to either accept or reject. But no, are oftentimes very difficult to handle. The sarcastic individual, and you can tell as soon as they enter the tone of voice and the skepticism of the words. And again, with these guys, you a lot of times avoid listening to the sarcasm, and you don't want to really attack every one of the little snide comments make. You let them pass by unnoticed. And then you are as professional as you can. You reflect back on what they've said and mirror their expressions and their verbal and nonverbal ways of saying it. And sometimes they see that they are being a little snooty. But you explore their cause of concern, their cause of criticism and sarcasm. Sometimes it's very unrelated to what exactly they say, but it shows that you care, and that sarcasm may decline as that care is indicated. You want to make the environment a place that they could actually share their feelings, safe, so that the sarcasm isn't used to mask that. And as much as possible, once you get the problem defined again, you move towards getting that parent to go to the next step of understanding exactly what happens, of trying to find out exactly the information that is needed to make a good decision to solve a problem. But sarcastic, you don't meet with sarcasm. Best let it be ignored unless they get really negative or use some words that are professional. The grumps are not really hard to handle. The guys that always say no, that everything's wrong, nothing's right. They complain and complain. They're whiners. Everything's wrong. The world's falling in. The sky's falling in. Chicken Little. But what you don't want to do is agree with them. If you think that you're an ally, they're going to complain even more. And again, you don't want to disagree with them, because then they think they got to convince you. And you don't want to tell them that it's not so bad, because then they're just complaining even more to show you that, yeah, it is. but you want to, as quickly as you can, as they grump, to move them into a solution. But at first listen, it may be an endless loop of gripes, but then at a point, once they've vented, you interrupt, and because if they've been repeating themselves, no need to listen to that all night long, because you're under a time limit. But then reflect back what you've heard so far and break down the generalizations. And this takes a lot of patience, and a lot of times they don't want to hear exactly what you're parroting back. But you can do this through sort of a guessing game. A lot of times you could fire off a bunch of guesses as to why the world's the way it is, and let them explain, or exaggerate to see and let them listen to what exactly they are griping about. And sometimes when they hear it from other people's mouths, say, no, that's not exactly what I meant. But a lot of times the gripes are not so much about you or child, it's just they see the glass as half full or half empty, and it's just part of their personality. So you work through that, and you find out exactly what they want to say to you, and try then to move them to a solution or get them on your side. The nitpicker is a personality, I think, dysfunction almost, that they haven't given up like the last guy has. Just gripes all the time. But they're lost in the details. A lot of times the nitpicker is that they can't see the forest for the trees, and so you don't want to ignore their need for details, and you don't want to try to change your mind, because then it just tries to make them be oppositionally defiant to you. So, but again, it begins with listening, and appreciate, and tell them you appreciate their attention to detail. And then, if it doesn't go too long, is there anything else? And once you've got all the details, you try to find out what's motivating their attention to those details, and get them to see the big picture. Because they sometimes, because of all the details, they can't see the forest for the trees being the details, and so they get stuck on certain little things and miss the big picture. And so you sometimes, once you see the big picture, and they realize the details are not that big a deal, they start to turn. But the nitpicker, again, you don't want to try to convince them that they're wrong right off the bat. Listen to it and try to get them to see the big picture a lot of times. The Avengers are, they're kind of the hard ones too. They're nice on the surface, even when things have gone wrong. But they're dangerous because they make, sometimes they make a big deal out of something small, and they hold it in, and they want to get even rather than get it corrected, and more dangerous than others a lot of times. And so they are the reputation wreckers that will go out if they can't get justice from this parent-teacher conference. But what you don't want to do is assume from these individuals that all is well. You need to kind of read behind the verbal and nonverbal clues very carefully, because they will sometimes mask it. But they will oftentimes not say what they're exactly feeling. So a lot of times you need to say it for them to get things on the table. And if you could say it for them, a lot of times they will let it go. If you know exactly what the incident is that they're holding in, that they want revenge for. And once it's on the table, then you could look for possible solutions together And oftentimes you do have to make it up to them if it's something that has gone wrong that you didn't realize. And you can use a system to do that, even though they're not demanding it. And once you get an avenger on your side, a lot of times it's really smooth sailing. They appreciated that you went the extra mile to find out and to get things corrected for them. The time robber is more often the type of individual that will give you the biggest headache in parent-teacher conference. They just like to talk. They're friendly. They really like the attention that you're giving them, and so they will try to demand more time than they actually need in a parent-teacher conference. And so you can't let a student monopolize or a parent monopolize all your time. And so you try as much as possible to summarize what they're saying and then take them to the next step. Make them figure out, okay, we're moving here now. And as you get near the end, you start talking in the past tense. It's been nice talking with you. Say things such as other people are waiting. Hey, can you help me out? And let's meet again. Blah, blah, blah. But typically they are just talkers. The powder keg is one that just flies off the handle. Does need then attention now. Different from the pit bull in that doesn't really demand an action. He just wants attention, and something's made him mad. And what you don't tell him at that, to calm down, take a deep breath, and let's go at this. This just makes it even worse. So what typically you do is you stop everything and you listen. And you're sensitive to what they're saying. You use their name quite often to calm them down. You say the words they need to hear, and as much as possible reflect what exactly they're saying. And sometimes a generic response such as, well, I don't want you to feel this way, and you don't have to feel this way. And then move towards, we're looking for a solution. And as much as you can, with a calm voice and a calm tone, it tends to, after a while, calm the individual down. Most times when I've seen the power keg erupt, and you get them calmed down, or even if you call for a break and the next day you have to meet, they will come back the next day and apologize to you. They know they were wrong. They just flew off the handle. But if at any time you feel threatened, or a nasty word is used, you do not have to tolerate that. And so you bring the discussion to a close. Let's cool down so calmer heads prevail tomorrow. Let's meet tomorrow at 3. And if he refuses to do that, say, well, let's see if we could bring the principal in here to help us reach a solution here. But I would not tolerate any verbal abuse from any parent. The demander is kind of the cross between the pit bull and the powder keg. Again, some of the common techniques that we've used before, you don't want to use. You don't want to tell them to calm down or take a deep breath. You don't want to argue with them, or you don't want to challenge them on what they are saying. And again, you don't want to agree with them because it again just inflames them more. You just calmly state that you're on their side. That gosh, you want to find out what exactly is what they're mad at, what their intent. Look for some solutions. Be very direct and to the point. And one of the keys to handling the powder keg and the pit bull is to look them right in the eyes. And to summarize frequently exactly what they're saying, especially as it comes to the big picture. Boy, what I hear you saying is you're awful upset because blank, blank, blank. If things get out of hand again, you call it to a close. But and sometimes you distance is a key factor, but different ethnic groups have different distances that you maintain in conflict situations. But you might maintain a distance here at a right angle, but I would, as much as you possible, listen and state exactly what they're saying over and over again, so they can listen to exactly how they're acting and what they're demanding, and move them towards a solution. Well, all of these types of parents, I wish we could kind of role play with you, because there's just a myriad of ways to kind of handle them. But the longer you deal with upset parents, principals are trained a lot of times to handle the upset parent in a calm manner. So too should you. Coaches will see it quite often, but a lot of times the parent-teacher conference will occur in the grocery store or the restaurant, or after school in the parking lot. Not so much in a parent-teacher conference, but a vast majority of your parents throughout your entire career will be highly supportive of you, that will respect what you do, and they'll go like the role model that you saw. But if in your career you run into one or two of these pit bulls or whatever, at least you have a little bit of background to handle them. And so, hope you enjoyed the session.